going to allow some time for everyone to start to join us. Great to have you here today. Right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Waring, Director of Education at the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program, Artists at Play. Before I introduce our wonderful guests, I just have a few updates before we get started. First, we love to hear from all of you. So if this is your first time in a Carle webinar, welcome. Please use our chat. One of the ways that we get to know each other is inviting people to go into the chat. Let us know where you're from. If you have a favorite picture book artist, share. If you have a favorite picture book, share. We love to see those in the chat. And we also have our Q&A button. So feel free to use that if you have questions during the program. We have allotted some time at the end for questions. If we have any technical difficulties and get cut off, we'll try to get right back online as soon as possible. You can use the link shared in your Zoom reminder to reconnect. And tonight's program is being recorded. So if you miss any part or if you'd like to share with a friend, we should have it on our YouTube page in about a week or two. Finally, we're so grateful to the Carle's members and business members and donors. Your contributions make our work possible. We'd love to thank the Patricia Morrison McDonald Endowment Fund for supporting our education programming and the Massachusetts Cultural Council for their operational support. Tonight, we are so thrilled to welcome 4 artists, Aaron Becker, Barbara Lehman, Juji Morales, and Kathryn Otoshi, whose art is in the Carle's current exhibition, Pictures at Play, Metafiction in Art, on view through November 3rd. Metafictive books tell stories and about the art of storytelling itself. Artists experiment with styles, typography, and page design to disrupt the rules of how books usually work. And I'll quickly introduce our 4 artists and our wonderful moderator. Aaron Becker is the creator of the Caldecott Honor Book Journey and 2 follow-up books in the trilogy, Quest and Return. He is the creator of A Stone for Sasha and the board books You Are Light and My Favorite Color. And Aaron, I can let maybe Aaron talk a little bit about this, but Aaron also just was an award winner for a very special award. Congratulations, Aaron.
Thanks.
Barbara Lehman has illustrated many books for children, including The Red Book, which was awarded the Caldecott Honor in 2005. A full-time illustrator, Barbara says, books and art have always held the strongest attraction for me. I've always felt drawn to commercial art because of its ability to reach many people. I like the idea of being part of the media in a meaningful and thoughtful way, especially with children as the audience. Juji Morales is an author-illustrator whose books have won the Pluribel Prey Award, the Christopher Award, the Caldecott Honor Award, the Jane Addams Award. Her books include Just in Case, Viva Frida, Little Night Nochecita, and Dreamers. And Katherine Otoshi is an award-winning author-illustrator known for her character-building number color book series 1, 0, and 2. She travels across the country to encourage children to develop strong character traits and to help readers find creative methods to engage and connect with their students through the power of reading, art, and literature. And this discussion is being moderated today by Kathy Mercier. Kathy is the guest curator at Pictures at Play, Metafiction Art, and she is the director for the Center for the Study of Children's Literature at Simmons University and its associated graduate programs. Her research focuses on multitextuality and the social construction of the child in literature. So I'm going to pass it on to Kathy. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you to everyone in the audience, but also to these incredibly talented artists who have taken time out of their days to, or maybe their evenings, to join us here for a conversation. I feel as though I've been working in the fields of metafiction for a very, very long time. And when I first proposed this exhibit to the Carle, I've got a lot of raised eyebrows, like, what's metafiction? Who's going to care? How are we going to get an audience? Well, there's a lot of jargon in there. And I said, I promise I won't use any jargon. I will not have words like palimpsest showing up on the walls of the show. And once we could see that is really about playfulness, the whole show started to come together. And metafiction is, as Courtney said, books about books, stories about stories. So when we're talking about individual images and The show is a collection of individual images, and each of these artists has at least one image in the show. We're then talking about an image, or an image that is referring to other images. So in the show as a whole, we have metafiction that nests, so a picture within a picture within a picture, that draws one's attention to the art within the art within the art within the art and the constructedness of the picture. We have books that refer to other books, and even books that refer to the creation of the same artist. And we have books that talk about or draw attention to the form of the book itself, right? The picture book has a certain kind of physicality and certain kind of material. 32-page picture book, traditionally, not always. There are people in this room who have broken that rule, which is delightful. But how the form of the picture book itself poses some particular challenges to the to the creator, and they, I hope, are challenges. Well, I won't say hope. I know they're challenges that are overcome and to great effect. So I'm going to start with a question to Kathryn. I have one question for each of the panelists. I hope that you'll put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll come to those at the end. And panelists have been invited to talk with each other as well. So Kathryn, in Draw the Line, there were any number of images we could have taken from that book and from a couple of others as well, but let's talk about Draw the Line. And Courtney, if you could start the PowerPoint, that would be great, so everybody could see the image or images that we have from Kathryn. Okay, thank you, Courtney. That's perfect. So one of the challenges again was to pick single images that were metafictive, and your book, Draw the Line, really accents that the picture book has some properties that pose challenges to you as an artist. And here, one of those properties is the gutter. What do you do with, and how do you solve that problem? Can you talk a little bit about what interests you about the picture book form, and what are some of the problems and creative opportunities that form offers you? And in this book, either in this image or Courtney, if you want to look at the next one as well, how do you triumph over the gutter?
So those are all really great questions. Draw the Line in particular had me in the gutter a lot, and they say to stay out of the gutter, but I was really immersed in the gutter. And part of it had to do with the metaphor of two boys who are drawing lines. They're coming from opposite sides of the page. If you look at them, they do not look the same. And when they bump accidentally, they initially are not upset completely, but they're like, hey, who are you? And we realize that they realize that their lines could connect. So the lines become an actual metaphor for their new starting relationship. So for me, I set up in general, and I think Aaron can talk about this too, but we both came from film, Aaron and I. And so for me, the book can become a kind of a stage, and these characters come in. And stage left is the boy who actually starts not meaning to, but causing a problem. And the other boy who has more circular thinking, as you can tell by the swirls he did, has different thinking. So linear thinking, circular thinking. And what happens is in the middle, of course, is the gutter. And in this particular story, there's a misstep where one of the boys, as they're playing with the line that they actually can lift up once the relationship is established, we go from it being a 1D form of the line to I guess a 2 or 3D form where it represents their friendship. And once what happens is there's a misstep, and they go kind of into a tug of war because they get tangled up in this relationship, this line. The line changes and becomes when the inside of, actually I have the book here, it might be easier if I could just show some of it. When they do have the misstep, the line starts to fray in the center, and the fray becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until it becomes an actual another thing, which is a crack that separates the two. And the biggest question here, as you're talking about the gutter, is how do we how do these boys come together? I emphasize the crack using the actual physical, tangible form of the book. And I feel like it really helps emphasize the distance between the two boys, and then trying to figure out how is, one of them are going to reach back and sort of figure out, how do we come together? So you notice too, the boy actually gets closer to on the other side of the page, kind of as an empathy gesture, and he gets closer. The line, we realize, can be smeared, and it becomes a bridge, which then the line becomes eventually a path where the boys realize they can travel on together. But there's a lot going on with the black and the white. There's a lot of gray zones in life. There's a lot of, without even words, labeling and anger that happens. And then after a relationship breaks, how do we come back together? And really, in a nutshell, even though it has no words at all, the concept is when we're feeling like this, we have to reach out where our commonalities are in order to come back together. And we reach out not from the farthest points of contention, but where we come together. So that's how I sort of use the gutter, my film experience of casting the characters, staging it, and using the line as a new character that transforms itself and actually brings the boys together.
I love your opening comment, which was that the linear thinking versus circular thinking,
Right.
and how over the course of the book that becomes in the beginning, it becomes a way to read and understand these characters and their differences, but over the course of the book, it actually becomes something quite different. And as the book develops this crack, your exploration of the gutter, by which I mean any reader of this book who didn't ever think about a gutter before, is suddenly aware that there's a gutter, that there's this thing in the book, this property of the book that creates and allows separation. And yet the resistance of your characters to give in to that separation is that they switch sides and then walk that parallel path is, so it's not linear thinking or circular anymore, but it's side by side. It's just such, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your choice of color in this book?
Sure. Yeah. What happened was in the beginning, there's this moment where it's kind of, I use yellow as sort of the sun almost representing brightness. But when they have any kind of bump or a misstep, I turn to the opposite color spectrum, which interplays. So here they are actually, feeling good about the relationships, but later on, what happens is when there is that misstep, the opposite color comes in, and it gets more and more dark, almost like clouds, and I use them almost as a weather form, which continues on throughout. But color is something that I feel like I use symbolically. I do it in my book one. I do it in some of my other, in fact, almost all of my books, I use color as a way to be able to describe emotion. And I'm sure maybe Aaron could talk about this too, or anybody who does books with very few words or is completely wordless. But I found using wordless picture books as a wonderful way to be able to do readings. Because I start asking the kids, what do you think is happening? Do the boys look the same? No. Are they happy about being separated? No, but what are they going to do about it? So it becomes this constant way for me to be able to say, what do you think is happening? Which I feel like is so important for critical thinking, is to simply ask questions. And because the more questions we ask collectively, maybe some answers to some of these big questions, these big questions can be answered in a way collectively we could all be able to address.
Thank you so much. And you gave me the perfect sideways to Aaron in many ways. So journey is a pretty big question in and of itself. What's a journey? Where does it go? Where do we go? How do we go? Do we ever get back? And to be able to capture this sense of both the journey itself, but also the journeyer and journeying in a wordless picture book or a speechless picture book, is one of the real to me, fascinating achievements of this particular book journey. The book is, I put under the category of intertextuality, so a book that refers to another book. Um, and and I think there are lots of overt references to other books in your work, but there are also some kind of hidden ones. And by hidden, I mean you may not have meant them, but I'm looking for them and trying to pull them out because they might have some meaning to me. And it's what I bring as a reader. Can you talk about the overt? What did you intend? What were the specific books that you knew you were invoking? And how might you have wanted your reader to use those?
Oh, wow. Yeah, there was a few books, but I had never written a picture book before, and I didn't actually. I was very cognizant of the possibility of copying stuff I liked if I paid too much attention. So I kind of made a rule for myself when I started off with the sketch dummy, and that was to only reference and only use where the wild things are. So like
Mhm.
everything else was I tried to totally tune out. And so when, I didn't know how long a picture book was supposed to be. So I looked at where the wild things are, which is 40 pages. So that's why Journey is 40 pages.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what size it should be, and it's roughly the same size as Where the Wild Things Are. This is my copy of Where the Wild Things Are, and this is the copy of Journey. So they're sort of like the same size book. Um, and the boat, obviously, there's a boat in both books. And one of the main bits is the girl's bedroom and the way that Sendak kind of frames the room within a frame. And it's not in the picture we're looking at here of the forest, but you can see through to her bedroom there actually, and you can see the little circular top to her bed is very similar to Max's um, there. So um, this was sort of my gold Bible, my gold standard for what I was hoping to accomplish, and everything else I tried to totally tune out. I will say, with the exception of this book,
Mhm.
um, David Macaulay's Castle. In fact, so the text, the all caps text of the for the title was very much what I was going for there. And my initial cover design, I had the castle of this cover
Mhm.
centered on the page with the boat going straight to the front door, just like the reader is going straight to the front door of this castle. And my editor didn't like it. That's the only reason it didn't end up that way. So yeah, David Macaulay's book and Sendak's book were sort of really where I was inspired by, or kind of using as a template, if anything, really to kind of understand the form.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so can you talk about what the girl is holding in her hand, or this child is holding in her hand?
Well, I tried to like everything in this book, I tried to leave it open to interpretation. So like even the facial expressions of the characters are pretty neutral so that the reader can project their own emotions onto the what the child is feeling.
Mhm.
And same thing with this drawing implement. Like for the text of the flap, my editor needed, she was like, "What is it?" I'm like, "I don't know."
Yeah.
So I grew up drawing with markers. And so in my mind, it's kind of like a marker, but that wouldn't really read visually. So I just kind of, it ends up looking kind of like a giant piece of sidewalk chalk.
Mhm.
So I think for the most part, when I do presentations to schools, I actually try and just call it a drawing implement and see what the
Yeah.
kids, if they ever make a reference, that's up to them.
Mhm. And can you talk a little bit about the influence of Harold and the Purple Crayon?
Oh, Harold and the Purple Crayon. No.
No, really? Okay, because in the opening pages, there's a child who's holding a purple crayon, right? And in Harold and the Purple
Oh, yeah.
Crayon, The child makes his own. So I bring that up because that was one of the reasons, not your intention, but that overt gesture toward Harold in the Purple Crayon as one that would be legible and known to children, right? That the character who's holding something in their hand and that something is a drawing implement has and is
Yeah.
about to embark on a journey that is self-created, right? And that is where there she, you know, does she draw herself into that door? Does she draw herself out of her bedroom, right? Who's controlling this journey? Or at what point, I'm going to go to your reference to Max, at what point does the journey take over, despite what she might intend or have in mind?
Yeah, or even in the case of Max, at what point did that happen in that book?
Right,
So he's
exactly.
like in his bedroom, and I remember reading that book as a child and just thinking, like anything, when you read fiction or watch a story unfold, you just assume like this is just what happens. This is what is happening. And as
Mhm.
an adult, you can think, oh no, it's like you're saying, it's a metaphor for something. So at what point does this little boy in his wolf suit decide that he's actually not in his bedroom anymore?
Right, right.
And I think it's kind of the same thing in this book. It's the exact same thing. Like we know that when we draw on a wall, the door doesn't come to life.
Right.
And so at what point are we departing into fantasy, like when she's actually drawing or when the door forms or when she walks through it?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really an interesting thing for me to
And
consider.
well, this is the door that's opening out of her into her bedroom. And this is my interpretation, it might not be anybody else's, but I also see her because of my reading history as Alice in Wonderland. You know,
Hmm.
that Alice falls down the rabbit hole. Well, you could fall down a tree just as easily, right? Or you could fall into a tree just as easily and then come out into this fantasy world that you may not know how to navigate. And what's so interesting about your character is how she figures out how to navigate this new landscape and to find her. She's not on anybody else's journey. She's on her own journey.
Yeah, and it was really important for me that she never feel afraid
Mhm.
because to me when I was a kid and I would draw, it was a way for me to kind of control my experience. So I would create worlds on paper, just like this girl's creating worlds in her imagination through drawing. And I always there's moments in the book where she seems to be threatened, like she's falling down a waterfall or she's being chased. But I always tried to show in her body language that she was just curious and she kind of knew what she was doing. And that's how I always felt as a young person drawing, which I tried to tap into for this story.
And these trees could be frightening, but they're so stable. They're right. The light illuminates the space that she's going into. Your choice of colors here are colors that are not I mean, red could be frightening, but it's a visual center point here, and it's not a frightening one. And so the palette itself is one that is calming rather than alarming. So yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, I've I wish we had every single picture of every single book, but we don't. So I'm going to go to Juji and talk about your image, which Courtney will bring up, as another kind of intertextuality. So Aaron talked about kind of the the references behind the art, and your references are right here in the art. And so, can you talk with us a little bit about how you selected these particular texts and how you imagine your audience engaging with them? This image is so much about the making of books.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the way I selected the books that are in Dreamers are because those were the books that I met and influenced the path that I took years later. Or actually, they were accompanying me through the journey, and like some of the books that are in the previous pages are like there is another page in which the first book appears, and it's a book that is floating on the air, and it's the first book I remember ever seeing at the library. like I do have a memory of that, although it's not the first book that I saw, but it's the first one that I have a memory of, and it's A Mother for Choco. And so when the books first appear in Dreamers, that's the one that is the centerpiece. And then as more books appear, they come in a certain chronology. They as I start being aware of books made by artists of color, of artists of Mexican descent or from the Latinx community. It's like it was the books marked the journey as it was at the beginning for me. Like at the beginning, I barely could remember the title of many of the books that I saw, because I need to mention that Dreamers is a story based in my own journey into coming into the United States. My immigrant journey, and books were the ones that also mark a path of how I came from not even being able to understand the titles of these books. And that's the reason why I don't remember what were the first books that I saw, because I cannot match them with language. I couldn't do it at the time. And then as we see the books through the story, they are also coming chronologically and kind of holding the path of someone like me who was trying to make stories as well.
That's so I'm going to ask you the question that every young person I've been in that gallery with has asked me. Is she sewing at the book that this child is going to write in? Or has this child been writing all of these other books that surround the child? And I'm intentionally not gendering the child. And that he's putting, sorry, I just did. Is the child putting the books into the backpack or taking the books out? Are they the ones yet to be written, or have they been done?
Yeah, the backpack is a symbol of the things that we immigrants carry with us when we come to a new country. And if you see it at the beginning of the book, I do reference the backpack as a place where we bring gifts. What I can say is that in my own journey, at the beginning, I had no idea that I had brought things. That I had an imaginary or a real actually backpack with me that I was carrying everywhere. And when these two characters get to see books at the library for the first time, the backpack that the mother has been carrying finally opens up, and all the things that she brought start coming out of the backpack, including the sunshine. And the last thing that that they bring out of the backpack is this pencil. And this pencil, for me, signifies the creativity and my interest and my talents and my strength as a person who likes to draw and is creative and likes to tell stories. So this woman, what she's doing is she's creating the book that they are going to write with their own story. That story that tells how they began living in this country, knowing that it was their home. So she is creating a giant book that they will both will be drawing and writing together.
One kind of cheating question here. Did you have to get permissions from the other publishers to include, the copies or the covers? And can you talk a little bit? I think it's probably hard for our audience to be able to see the covers. Can you identify the titles of the books?
Like in this one, you can
Yeah.
see The Journey.
Right.
And then there is a book illustrated by Julie Flett, which I don't remember the name. There is the book, it's Chato's Kitchen.
Yeah.
And the book about the this person who meets a tiger, which is a real story. I don't remember the exact title right now. And I want to be careful when I talk about this because I know that my editor is watching. And
Never a good thing.
when I started making the illustrations of the book, I had mentioned that I wanted to bring the books that I have grown with, that ones that had accompanied me in my journey to become an actual creator of books as well. And then I didn't really ask permission. And then I start just drawing them in the same way that I have always draw the things that I felt passionate about. And it felt to me like I was painting and drawing the portraits of my family, of people that I love, which in this case were these books who had been my companions. And then I told my editor, I'm doing this. I'm actually painting them. I'm not copying them exactly like it. I'm trying to make them a little fussy, but you can still see that those are the books. So we embark in a journey of actually asking for permission and going around, and must everybody say, actually everybody say yes. But then I also heard from the lawyers at my house, that even though the authors and the illustrators actually had given permission to use the covers, that was not a guarantee that I will not get into trouble. So I need to be just careful in my depiction, like not make them exactly like the books they were. But what I'm gonna say is that people who were in these books, a lot of authors got in contact with me, and they were delighted and they were grateful. And I think that what they were grateful about was not as much as my depiction, but the power that our connections reflected in these images. To see themselves being part of somebody's journey, I think is what we all cherish. You know, we might imagine that there is a reader who is connecting with us because of the books that we create, but it isn't until someone actually tells us so how important they were. And I think in my way, this was my way of telling all these authors and illustrators how important these books were for this reader.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. That's, I know it is one of the images that the younger viewers spend a lot of time trying to identify and play the matching game with themselves. So thank you. Barbara, so the Red series, and I'll have Courtney switch the slide, your Red series, which is now my coinage of the word, it's probably totally unfair, offers an extended and pretty sophisticated consideration of nesting as the metafictive device. So nesting is the picture within the picture within the picture, right? And how does Red Again speak back to the Red Book, which is a kind of self-reference, right? I mean, you rely on the reader to make that connection, but it's there. And if you can talk about the placement of these two images in Red Again and how you see them as working together.
Okay, so first I'll talk about these two images. Before this is about the middle of the book, and so before what we see are two solitary children. One is in a city where it's snowy, so it's obviously a colder place. The other one is on a small boat, and he finds a book floating in the water, and the other boy finds a book, and it actually comes from the other Red Book, but he finds a book on his way home from school. And they each look deeper and deeper into the images they see when they open the book. So the boy with the glasses is seeing more of like a map, and he's seeing closer and closer to an island. Then he sees the boat. And then the other child is seeing a city, and it's getting, oh, I'll kind of show it like a, let's see. It zooms in closer and closer to buildings until you see a window, till you see an actual child. And they realize they're each seeing the same thing and they see each other. So it is kind of this classic nesting with two. And so I feel like they the moment they see each other, I'm glad it turns out to be a powerful moment with the nesting. I think that really heightens the emotion of it. And I like a lot of adults will say, "Oh, this is a book about the power of books and the power of story," and children see it as the power of friendship. So they get very excited of these kids being able to see each other, and then they go on through the book to end up being able to meet each other. So I think the exciting thing about a nesting image is that it sort of brings a feeling of like infinity, and so it brings us sort of a moment that brings sort of a big emotion to a page. It kind of highlights the emotion that's there. So to talk about the two books, so these images are from this book. So that's the child on his bicycle, and the book that it pairs with is the red book, and so together, yes, these books also nest with each other, kind of with the same. It plays with infinity again, because the red book starts with a girl finding a book in the snow, in the street, in a snowy city. She eventually, by the last page, the book has been dropped and the boy with the glasses has picked up the book. And red again starts with the boy with the glasses picking up the book in the snowy city. It ends with the girl picking up the book. So it's a prequel. Both books are a prequel and a sequel at the same time.
Mhm.
They make an infinite loop.
Yeah.
It's very fun to read both these books to children at the same time, and you kind of just see their brains melt when they get to one book ends or the other begins. And so
Yeah.
I think yeah, I think I answered the question, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, you completely did. And I love your ending. I mean, Publishers Weekly, when it reviewed the book, talked about it as the Mobius strip, right? That each book is a Mobius strip on its own, but the two together just make this really complicated, reference and extend that Mobius strip idea. The other thing that these two images are about to me is about, and this goes back to what the other panels have talked about too, about recognition and recognizing both oneself in a book, but also recognizing one's friend in a book, right? And so as the characters are looking out at the reader, what are you hoping the reader takes from that direct kind of, I don't want to call it confrontation, but that direct full-facedness? I mean, we seldom see characters look directly at us in a book.
Right. So it ends up being, even though they're looking at each other, but in order to look at each other, they look straight out to the reader. So they are breaking the fourth wall, and
Right.
they're making eye contact with the reader, who is a child holding a red book in their hands.
Right.
So I hope that the child reader thinks, I'm with this group. I too am the child with the red book. So
Yeah. So just another invitation to friendship, another opportunity for recognition and inclusion. Yeah, it is. I saw Aaron shaking his head. So
I'm
Aaron,
just like, it's like you're talking about melting brains over here.
yeah, yeah.
I think it's actually quite difficult what you just said about the child is also holding a red book. Like, I think it's very difficult to think of ourselves from an aerial view where we could be seen doing something, because we're just like, and the notion that the reader is also doing the same thing as what the kids, I had never thought of. I've seen your book so many times and I'd never thought of that. And I feel kind of idiotic for not getting that. It's like a whole nother level.
Well, and it's the notion of, I mean, that conveys, I think, to a young reader that they're in the position of reading, right? It makes kind of overt you are reading the same book that they are reading. But once you realize, and I think this is true for all of your books, or all of these images, once you realize as a reader that you are in the position of reading, you also realize you're in the position of being the character in the book. I mean, this book may not depict you as the character, but you are as much a character as they are because you are a reader of that same thing. So you're writing, as they are reading these stories, you are also writing their stories and writing your story with them. So the negotiation that each of your works have, and the invitation to the reader to negotiate very fluid meaning, is so metafictive and so very attractive to readers. I have one more question, then we'll turn to the audience. It is I'm interested, and this came up from another panel. I'm interested in the role that digital art plays in your work. Are you using digital art with some of your other work? Are you solely creating by hand? I don't mean, I mean, only creating by hand. Solely is too limited a word. Are you mixing and matching? And I'm just curious about where you are as practicing artists today in a world where illustration itself is changing so very quickly.
Is that
Or I'd like to hear from everybody. We can go, let's go. Yeah, whoever wants to go first.
I can
Well,
say,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
no, when I started making books, I didn't know how to make art, and it was like entering a world where there was so much to learn. And the things that I learned was painting on paper with acrylics, but just as art and as the world has not stayed in one same place ever, I think the art of picture books is not staying in one place. And right now, at least in my case, my books are made from art that I made on my actual drawing table with my hands, with actual paints on actual paper. And then those elements, I put them inside my computer, and then the digital part starts. So I think that it's just a really big combination of all the things that we know how to do, all of the tools, actual physical tools, and the ones that we have with our craft that allow us to create this art that is the art of the things that we bring from the past and the things that we are learning nowadays.
Thank you. And you're all shaking your heads like, yes, of course. We're doing that too. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Pretty
Although,
much.
like when I started making books, I had come from a digital background in film design, and where they really just want you to use the computer because it's faster and easier to change. But it was very important for me to not do that. So I used what I knew from computer design to help the drawing process, like the sketching and the architecture in the book was all sort of, I used the computer as a tool, but then in the end, I put it all away and just made watercolor pen and ink drawings because I wanted to reference sort of classic children's book illustration. I wanted this book to have that feel, and I knew it wouldn't if I used the computer. And so since then, I've done like a mix of things. The Stone for Sasha was all digital, painted on an iPad. And that was an experiment for me to see if I could do that. And then other books have been a mix, like The Tree in the River was a mix of photography and model making and pencil drawing and digital paint. So it's always now it's just another tool in the toolbox, and I don't differentiate between one and the other.
I was going to just jump into with kind of what both Juji and Aaron were saying, but I find doing things still traditionally really helpful. When I'm using things too digitally, I tend to just go to the palette and just pick the color that's there versus when, you have a mix of watercolors and things sometimes are muddy, but you can create exactly the color you want when you have that whole palette of watercolors that you're mixing together. And the other thing I was going to say too is, at least for me, metaphorically, with watercolors, I might use watercolors for a book that deals with grieving because, it's sort of emotionally flexible, but also reminds me of tears. Or I'm currently working on something with my buddy, Jim Averbeck, about homelessness. And so Juji knows this, but I'm working on stuff with paper bags, literally paper bags, or, textural things like, the asphalt, or working on, Jim suggested, hey, why don't you use chalk, for example, to show the homelessness? And so for me, the homelessness was coming from when I saw homelessness in LA. My first initial reaction was kind of like horror, about how prevalent it is everywhere. And then what was happening is I noticed that the more I saw it, the more I treated it as the background. So for me, the illustrations in the beginning, I'm actually drawing over, discarded materials and asphalt. And then when they are finally seen, they move away from that they're seeing. But really using medium collage for a purpose, using watercolors for a purpose. And I do that quite a bit in my own art. But everybody here is thinking in the same way, really using the layers and media to have more meaning, I feel like.
So I am pretty much sort of, I think we're all in the same boat where it's sort of a mix. It's what works best in a certain situation. And I would say that overall it's, for me, been most helpful with sketching and composition, which was very laborious for me on paper. It's so much easier to do that like on a program like Procreate. And then I think for the finishes, I would do one or the other depending on what the project is.
Great. Thank you all for that insight. I think we probably have a few questions, and there's one more thing I want to say to folks in the audience. If you get to the Carl to see this exhibit, I want you at various points I want you to stand in front of the Aaron Becker illustration and look to your left and to your right and across the room and think about the conversations that piece is having with everything else. Then stand in front of Barbara Lehman's piece with your back to that and have the conversation with everything else that's surrounding you. Kathryn, Draw a Line also has a prominence of connecting. There's wall art that comes from that book. So stand with your back to those and stand with your back to Juji's work and look at how it's engaging with others. An exhibit is about a conversation between images. This is a conversation between artists, but how you put those images into conversation with each other is, I think, so important and is an act of your own creativity. And I want to invite you to indulge that and to take the time to think about how art from one person talks to and talks back at art from another, and how you assemble that meaning in your own mind. Courtney, questions from the audience?
Yes, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Aaron, Barbara, Juji, Catherine. I completely agree, Kathy. Please indulge if you get to the Carl to see the exhibition. It really has been such a joy for our guests. We do have a question from Kit. And they say, I love hearing so much emphasis on journeys. In the spirit of metafiction, I'm interested in hearing any reflections on how the journey of creating and publishing a book, the journey the characters go through your book, and the journey the readers go through reading the book inform each other, lead together, or interact. Wow.
Do we just jump in kind of, or?
Yeah, just jump in. That's a loaded question, Kit.
Usually I write these stories because it has a personal reason to kind of spark the whole idea. And Draw the Line actually came from an argument that I had with my father, who was just sort of on opposite sides of the fence of what was happening in the world. Talking about walls, physical walls, and I felt a wall between him. And this book originally started with it being a personal journey about drawing the line because I was saying yes to too many things, but it ended up evolving into the whole thing, what the book is about relationships, about opposites, and how we can come together. And how I resolved it, I'm Japanese American. My dad was interned in the camps during World War II, is instead of talking to him directly about our hot button things that were happening currently in the world, instead I sat down and I said, Dad, can you tell me what happened in the camps and how it felt when you saw huge signs saying JAP, go home, and how upsetting that was. And he sat down and kind of the wall just dropped, and he told me, and we spoke for an hour, and I ended up bringing it around to current events in a very gentle way, and we had a conversation. But I think books do that. For me, that's how my books get started, and it might not be obvious at all when you see the book, but that's how it works for me, is coming from a personal place.
That's great. That's a great story. For me, it's like, for the question, I think I only really have to do with 2 of the 3 parts. So, because like Catherine, like the book idea stems from something personal. The creation of the work is a personal effort, and what I imbue into the characters is going to be personal. And because I do wordless books, I'm not really dictating too much. There's certain things, but most of it is open-ended. And so then what the world sees in it and what they think it's about or what they take away from it is I'm completely separated from that, because I don't want to control that. And I think the reason these books, people respond to the books that I do, is because there's space for them to make it what they want it to be. And I really do think that's where it ends for me. Like, actually, the way it works, if you don't know, is that we finish the artwork for a book about a year and a half before it publishes. So by the time the book comes out, we're on to something else. And then we need to talk about it and go on a book tour and show up, and we're like, right, oh, that book. And so I think there's a separation, and it's probably a healthy separation, although I'm curious to see if other authors here have different experiences with that.
My experience is very similar. I also start making books from the spaces that still need something in me, whether it's something that I need to resolve, a question that I need to answer, something that is provoking, whether it is happiness, heartbreaking, even fear. And from that, the way that I know how to, because sometimes I don't know what else to do, is I make a book. I start making a book. And I was thinking about how the different journeys were mentioned, the journey of the author. And I think that we are, and the journey of the reader that makes the book theirs. Because truly, no matter what our intention is in making a book, it will never be a complete story until it's read by someone and the story becomes their story. And then we have no control over what the interpretation of what we thought that we made was. It's out of our hands. And we have many instances where people come and tell me, oh, the story that you wrote, like, now I understand, how you did this. And I thought, did I do that? I didn't realize it, but I think that what we are doing is that we, in the way that we put ourselves out there, someone is gonna fit in the same space. And then that's how they are gonna recognize themselves in those books, because the books that we are making are actually mirrors in which we see ourselves. And when we give it to the reader is capable of seeing themselves, himself in the books. And then I was gonna say that the other journey that sometimes we don't mention is the journey also of the publishing. What books are picked? What stories are picked to be published? And those are also determined by the state of our world. What is happening in our world right now? What are the stories that their voices are being heard, which ones are not being heard, which ones are being accepted, which ones are being understood. And I think that's a journey that we need to look at very, very closely, because we need to be able to open that journey for many, many more voices. Sometimes not being able to understand those stories has been the barrier that allows them to become books and be shared with everybody. But I think that we, as a society, we need to open up a little bit more so that we can hear even those things that we are not accustomed at hearing yet. And in that way, give a way for even more stories to be told.
Nice.
I'll just chime in quickly. And say that a lot of my inspiration when I make a story is I think of a strong childhood wish that I had, some type of very strong wish, and how do I set up a character so that something impossible can become possible, like something that, children have all sorts of wishes that are impossible, and how do you take away the barriers and make special things happen so they can actually get to the thing that they want? And does that have parallels with publishing? I would say yes. we make books from a strong wish, a strong vision that we have. We want to put a certain thing out in the world, and it can seem impossible, but we take all the steps and do all the things to try to make it happen. I'm going to wrap up there, but I just want to quickly say, while everyone was talking, I absolutely loved just looking at people's artwork. It was so beautiful.
Yes. Yes.
Well, we are at our time. This was just so wonderful to hear from everyone. I want to thank Aaron, Barbara, Juji, and Cathryn for joining us today, and Kathy for moderating and guest curating Pictures at Play. Everyone, thank you for joining us. We hope you will come to the exhibition if you can, or visit another virtual program. You can check out our website, carlmuseum.org, to see what we have coming up. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitations to the journey and to the conversations about them.